Hello everybody, my name is Danielle Fopp and I will be taking you through today's lecture on environmental appraisal. Now we know that a project requires an environmental appraisal and that this appraisal needs to provide a sound recommendation about the environmental viability of the project. That is, can the project obtain the necessary approvals, and if so, can it be done at a reasonable cost? This exercise also allows for a reduced environmental footprint of the project, offering input to the design of the technical requirements, greatly contributing to the sustainability of the initiative. So let's start off with a bit of a background to the environmental appraisal. To approach the question adequately of are there any specific aspects of the project that make environmental approvals impossible or the cost to obtain them prohibitive, 4 steps are necessary. They allow an effective assessment of the environmental aspects of a construction project to be considered. Now, infrastructure projects will often have significant environmental impacts arising from both construction and operation, and these can be both positive and negative. The impacts may also include follow-on effects beyond the immediate project area, as well as beyond the people directly associated with the project. These are referred to as secondary impacts. Both primary and secondary impacts and the corresponding formal process of approvals are a common source of delays in projects. Now, after we have appraised or evaluated the environmental issues, we can create a structured recommendation about the project's environmental factors, and this is a very important output of the appraisal phase. Now, the main purpose of a comprehensive assessment of the environmental issues in the appraisal phase is to ensure that environmental considerations are explicitly addressed and incorporated into the green light decision. We also need to make sure that there are no unmanageable environmental obstacles ahead of the project. This allows us to anticipate, avoid, minimise or offset the adverse significant biophysical effects of infrastructure. In some countries and organisations, a project's funding or bank loans will also be attached to an environmental or social categorisation process. The potential project may be categorised as follows. Category A, projects with potential significant adverse environmental and social risks and/or impacts that are diverse, irreversible, or unprecedented. We have Category B, projects with potential limited adverse environmental and social risks and/or impacts that are few in number, generally site-specific, or largely reversible. And then finally we have Category C, which is projects with minimal or no adverse environmental and social risks or impacts. Now, these names and categories will vary from organisation to organisation, but in the context of development assessments, an adverse environmental impact is a negative effect resulting from a development. Now, all projects are likely to have some impact on the environment, and most impacts can be dealt with through design. So the EIA process, which is an environmental impact assessment process, which we will touch on shortly, is designed to address these potentially significant impacts. We want to ensure that our project is a B or C category. In other words, there are limited or no adverse effects, and those which are there can be mitigated or minimised. So some of the questions that we are looking at this stage are there any specific aspects of the project that make environmental approvals impossible? Are there any specific aspects of the project that make the cost to obtain approvals prohibitive? So you could have a system in place that allows you to get these approvals, but it's going to cost you more than the actual construction of the project. Is that worth it for your client? Will large variations to the project be required to obtain approvals? And like we said, the client needs to decide, is the expenditure worthwhile? So in your project appraisal recommendation, you are not saying whether the expenditure is worthwhile. However, you will be making a recommendation, and it is ultimately up to the client to decide what is best for their portfolio and company. So the first step in an environmental appraisal is generally the identification of all legal and regulatory aspects relevant for obtaining the environmental approvals. The second step is a thorough due diligence effort to identify, describe, and as far as possible quantify the environmental impacts of the project. Now, several countries, including Australia, call this exercise an Environmental Impact Assessment, or EIA, and we look into this in greater detail very soon. The third step is the definition of a strategy to mitigate the specific effects where they exist. So there should be a focus on the most significant environmental effects first, and mechanisms should be identified to minimise these. Then the fourth step is to obtain, wherever possible, the environmental permits and final approvals needed for construction of the infrastructure. Now, the fourth step, which is the environmental permits and final approvals, is not part of the project appraisal phase. However, it's worth noting that this is still required.